Hello, my name is Zoe. At my sister's wedding, my father looked me in the eye and told the entire room, "You get nothing." Everyone laughed, waiting for me to break, but they didn't know. While they erased me from our family story, I had already taken everything they thought was theirs. What happens when the forgotten daughter owns the empire her father just sold? The first chill of October brushed against my skin as I stepped out of the car and faced the Magnolia Grand Ballroom in Charleston. The building glittered under strings of golden lights, its arched entrance framed by fresh-cut white roses that spilled fragrance into the night air. I could hear the hum of laughter, champagne corks, and the faint notes of a string quartet drifting through the open doors. For anyone else, it might have felt like a dream. For me, it was a reminder that this family valued performance over love. An old saying came to mind: "Money talks, but wealth whispers." Tonight, the whisper wasn't subtle. It was deafening. I paused on the steps, adjusting my dark tailored suit. I had chosen it deliberately, a stark contrast to the sequined gowns and jewel-toned ties I knew waited inside. I wanted armor, not adornment. My sisters would sparkle, my parents would shine, but I would stand apart. The youngest daughter, always at the edge of the family portrait. I inhaled, squared my shoulders, and walked toward the grand doors, ready to face whatever new way they had prepared to remind me that I didn't belong. Inside, the air smelled of roses and polished wood. A staff member with a clipboard greeted me. "Name, please?" she asked politely, her pen poised. I told her, calm but firm, waiting for her to find me on the family list. She scanned, frowned, and shook her head. "I'm sorry, you're not listed under the family section. You're on the guest list." Her voice was soft, but the man behind me in line chuckled loud enough for both of us to hear. "Even the computer knows you're not one of them," he muttered, half under his breath, but with a smirk that showed he wanted me to catch it. I didn't flinch. I've learned not to. Instead, I answered evenly, "In my family, you can build an empire and still be invisible." She hesitated, offered a quick apology, and scribbled my name onto a smaller card before handing it back. The man behind me shook his head and walked on, still grinning. As I moved deeper into the ballroom, memories pressed at me. Standing to the side while family photographs were staged without me, watching speeches where my name was never mentioned, listening as my achievements were brushed aside in favor of real accomplishments, those that fit the Theodore narrative. The weight of being the forgotten one had grown familiar, but familiarity doesn't dull pain. It simply reshapes it. The ballroom glittered with chandeliers and mirrored walls. Glasses clinked as champagne was poured into tall flutes. Conversations swirled about mergers, upcoming charity events, and real estate developments. At the center of it all, my sister Celandine, the bride, looked radiant in lace, glowing as though she had been born for this stage. People orbited her like she was the sun. My mother, Elsinore, stood nearby in lavender silk, her smile wide and warm to every guest, except when her eyes grazed mine. When they did, she quickly looked away, the way she always had, as though acknowledging me would disrupt the perfection she curated. My eldest sister, Noctra, clung to our father's arm, laughing too loudly at his every line, basking in the reflected glow of his authority. I chose a glass of sparkling water instead of champagne, the bubbles rising in silence, a quiet rebellion of my own. From where I stood, I looked like a ghost among the living, present but unseen. When I found my assigned table, my breath caught for a moment. It was tucked near the side corridor, just a few steps from the restroom doors. The name card at my place read Zoe Theodore, missing the last letter. A simple mistake, perhaps, but after years of being erased, it didn't feel accidental. One of the staff noticed, rushing over with flushed cheeks. "I'm so sorry, miss. Let me fix that immediately." She swapped the card out for another, spelling my name correctly. "Just a printing error," she explained nervously. The guests already seated at the table exchanged glances. One of them leaned to the other and whispered, not softly enough, "Always something with her, isn't it?" I sat, placed my glass on the table, and smoothed my jacket. A mistake? I thought. Or the perfect reminder that I don't belong. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. A wrong name, a seat by the restroom. These were metaphors made flesh. My life in this family had been one long exercise in being misplaced. From my table, I had a clear line of sight across the ballroom. My father, Thorin, stood tall near the front, his booming laugh filling the hall. He raised his hand, and the guests around him lifted their glasses in unison. Not toward the bride, not toward love, but toward him. Always him. My sister Noctra pressed close, smiling as though his victories were her own. I watched in silence, my jaw tight. To him, this wedding was less about union than about legacy. Less about family than about empire. A marriage, a business deal, what difference did it make? To him, they were the same currency. I sipped my water, letting the taste ground me. I knew what was coming. He never wasted an audience. Tonight, under the guise of celebration, he would make an announcement that had nothing to do with vows or love. I whispered to myself, a quiet promise. Stay steady. But I knew. Families have a way of finding the softest spot and pressing until you bleed. A waiter approached, setting a fresh glass of champagne before me. He leaned in slightly, voice low but respectful. "Miss, your father is about to speak." I nodded, eyes fixed on Thorin as he stepped onto the small stage, glass raised, ready to turn my sister's wedding into his theater. The waiter's words still echoed in my ears. My father was about to speak when I drifted back into the current of the ballroom. The chandeliers cast a glow so warm that it almost disguised the chill settling in my chest. Laughter burst from clusters of guests. Champagne flowed as though it were water, and my sister's name floated through conversations like a hymn. Celandine. Always her. She stood in the center of the room, face lit like a stage actress, everyone orbiting her. I, on the other hand, moved at the edges, tracing a line around the perimeter, careful not to collide with anyone too eager to forget I existed. I let my eyes rest on my father from a distance. He was magnetic in his own way, shoulders squared, his voice booming, people leaning in when he spoke. I didn't approach him. I never did. There was no invitation there, not for me. My presence in this ballroom was tolerated, not welcomed. When you grow up long enough as an afterthought, you learn to stop expecting warmth. Instead, I searched for the table where I had been assigned, bracing myself, though I didn't yet know why. When I finally found it, I understood. It was shoved near the far end of the hall, tucked so close to the restroom corridor that each time the door swung open, the faint scent of disinfectant and the rush of flushing pipes carried into my space. Guests seated there weren't family. They were acquaintances of acquaintances, the kind of people invited because excluding them would have looked bad. And in that cluster, I was placed. I slid into my chair, and my eyes landed on the place card. My name had been printed wrong again, as if correcting it at the entrance hadn't been enough. Zoey Theodore. One letter shaved away, one thread cut from an already frayed fabric. The woman seated next to me noticed, leaned in with a small laugh, and said, "At least it's easy to sneak out for a bathroom break here." She sipped her drink, unconcerned by how her joke sliced. Others at the table smiled politely, some avoiding my gaze altogether. I stared at the card, unmoving. In families like mine, I thought, seating charts speak louder than wedding vows. I kept my face calm, but inside the bitterness rose like tidewater. Every detail tonight had been curated. The roses, the ice sculptures, the playlists. My seat was no mistake. It was a statement, out of sight, out of mind. From where I sat, I could see the head table clearly. My father sat at the center, with Noctra on his right, leaning into his every word. She laughed, touched his arm, mirrored his movements, as though to remind the room that she was the heir to his attention. Beside them, my mother glided like an actress in lavender silk, smile perfect, eyes scanning the room with rehearsed ease. She greeted guests with warmth, touched arms, offered compliments. But when her eyes passed over me, she looked through me as if I were part of the wallpaper. I thought about all the other events, the birthdays, the galas, the charity banquets, where I had been pushed to the background. Not one memory stood alone. They blurred into a pattern so consistent it felt deliberate. Tonight's table wasn't an accident. It was a continuation of that same story. The clinking of glasses pulled me back. A middle-aged man across the table leaned forward. "You're Zoey, aren't you? I heard you've done something impressive out in California. Built a company or some tech thing?" His voice was kind, almost genuinely curious. For once, someone seemed to see me. I opened my mouth, ready to answer, to claim a sliver of myself in this sea of dismissals. But then, like always, she appeared. My mother's voice cut cleanly through the space before mine could fill it. "Oh, that's just her hobby," she said, her tone smooth, gracious, smiling still. "She's not really part of the family business." The words landed heavier than the man-intended question. The table shifted. Nods, polite smiles, attention drifting back to safer topics like Thorin's leadership and Noctra's upcoming charity projects. The man who had asked looked momentarily embarrassed, like he had stepped into a place he didn't belong. I sat silent. My throat was tight, but I wouldn't give her the satisfaction of seeing me break. In one breath, I thought. She erased years of my life. That's how my mother has always loved me, by pretending I don't exist. And somehow, that betrayal cut deeper than the laughter at the entrance or the jokes about my table. Strangers mock you out of ignorance. Family erases you on purpose. I swirled the water in my glass, letting the movement calm me. My mentor's voice echoed in memory. Never fight a battle on their terms. Timing is everything. That advice had carried me through more storms than I could count. It carried me now. I breathed deep, steady. I would not speak here. I would not argue. I would not raise my voice in this hall designed for their comfort, their narrative. Let them think me defeated. Let them laugh. The night was far from over, and I carried with me a truth none of them could imagine. I glanced again toward my father. He was laughing, glass raised, already preparing to claim the room with whatever announcement he had rehearsed. He looked smug, satisfied, like a king presiding over loyal subjects. The waiter appeared again, his tone low, respectful. "Miss, your father will speak shortly." I set down my glass and locked eyes with Thorin across the hall. For the briefest second, his gaze met mine, and there was something in it. Smugness, yes, but also the certainty of a man who believed he had already won. I knew better. Whatever words he was about to unleash, they weren't blessings. They were weapons. I stayed at the restroom table, glass of water in hand, as the current of the evening swirled around me. The sting of the guest list, the wrong name card, the careless dismissal from my mother, each cut stacked neatly on top of the last, like bricks in a wall designed to keep me outside. Around me, the ballroom pulsed with life. The violinists drew out long notes, waiters slipped through aisles with trays of shrimp cocktail and champagne, and guests buzzed with conversation about real estate, hedge funds, and who wore what. I looked at the head table again. My father threw his head back in laughter, clinking glasses with a local senator who hung on his every word. My mother smiled like she had been sculpted that way, never faltering, never cracking. And Celandine glowed, her dress shimmering like it had been spun out of moonlight, her groom staring at her with rehearsed adoration. It all looked perfect from the outside. I sat at the edges, invisible by design. Faulkner's words drifted into my mind. The past is never dead. It's not even past. Tonight wasn't new. It was just another chapter in a book they had been writing without me since I was a child. I knew another humiliation was coming, though I couldn't have guessed how pointed it would be. Zoey? A voice startled me. I turned to see a man weaving his way between tables. I blinked, recognition dawning. It was Nathan Fields, an old acquaintance from my college years. We had worked together on a campus tech competition back when I was just a girl with a laptop, code spilling out of me faster than I could explain it. "I can't believe it's you," he said warmly, pulling out the chair next to mine. "It's been years. You still look the same. Hey, didn't you pitch that software idea back then? The one that ended up being used in half the schools across the state?" I nodded slowly, but before I could speak, he added, "Funny though, I was looking through the wedding program earlier. They mentioned your father's company using that same prototype, but your name wasn't anywhere in the write-up. Why is that?" His question was innocent, but it felt like someone had ripped the bandage off a wound I had worked years to keep covered. My chest tightened. Around us, the table grew quiet, guests leaning just slightly closer, waiting for my response. I forced a smile, steady but cool. Some stories get rewritten depending on who's holding the pen. Nathan frowned as though trying to reconcile my answer with his memory. "But I remember, you were the one who stayed up 3 nights straight debugging that code. You were the one who presented it." Across the table, a woman whispered to her husband, "Strange. Why wouldn't they give her credit?" Her words pricked, not because they were cruel, but because they reflected exactly what I already knew. My family hadn't just ignored me, they had erased me. I raised my glass, taking a slow sip. Inside, my thoughts burned. It's one thing to be overlooked, it's another to be deleted so thoroughly that even friends doubt your place in your own story. Nathan excused himself, promising to catch up later. I watched him disappear into the crowd, his question lingering in the air long after he was gone. The ballroom lights suddenly dimmed. A hush spread across the tables. 2 massive projection screens flickered on, framing the stage. The MC's voice rang out, "Ladies and gentlemen, a look back at the Theodore family legacy." The first images were predictable. My father breaking ground at a construction site, golden shovel in hand, Noctra standing beside him in tailored suits, her smile practiced for the cameras, Celandine in a gown, cutting ribbons at charity events she had barely planned. Guests murmured approval, some clapping, but I sat frozen. Because I remembered those moments. I had been there. I had taken photos, drafted proposals, even written code that made some of those launches possible. And yet on the screen, it was as though I had never existed. Slide after slide paraded by, family vacations, business expansions, glossy portraits of my parents and sisters. My chair might as well have been empty in all those years, the way it was empty in these photos. Then came the slide that made my blood run cold. A prototype. A software interface I had designed in my early 20s, the one Nathan had just mentioned. On the screen, the caption read, "Pioneered by Thorin Theodore, developed under the leadership of Noctra Theodore." Gasps rose from nearby tables. Applause followed, filling the room as if the truth had no place here. My stomach turned. My creation, my work, stripped of my name and gift-wrapped as their triumph. I didn't clap. I sat with my hands in my lap, my jaw set. Inside, I whispered to myself, it wasn't just forgetting me. It was deleting me on purpose. And the slideshow rolled on, guests leaning forward, admiring the grand family history being displayed. To them, it was inspiring. To me, it was a funeral for my place in this family. When the lights came back on, the applause thundered. I stared at the empty glass in front of me, fighting the urge to stand, to shout, to demand they see me. My hands itched to tear down the screens, to scream that the truth was sitting right here, wearing a charcoal suit, breathing the same air. But then I remembered, choose your battlefield wisely. Silence can be a weapon if you hold it long enough. My mentor's words came back sharp and steady, so I swallowed my fury, let the bitterness settle into something more solid. Not weakness, not surrender. Calculation. I wasn't going to give them a scene tonight. I was going to give them a reckoning. The slideshow ended with a grand image of my father and Celandine holding hands, smiling as if the world belonged to them. The room erupted into applause once again. Glasses clinked, toasts rang out. I lifted the champagne flute from my table, my hands steady despite the heat in my chest. I took a measured sip, keeping my eyes fixed on the stage where my father stood, basking in glory. They think this story has no place for me, I told myself. They have no idea I already wrote the ending. Dinner hour settled in like a tide, swelling laughter and chatter until the entire ballroom seemed to vibrate. Waiters glided between tables, their trays stacked with plates of salmon and tenderloin, while glasses refilled themselves without a single guest noticing. The scent of garlic butter mingled with roses, heavy and dizzying. My body shrank instinctively, not because I lacked strength, but because the evening had been crafted precisely to make me feel smaller. It was a production designed to crown a few and exile the rest. I heard someone behind me quip about the generosity of the decorations, another marvel at the imported orchids hanging above the dance floor. Their voices blurred, background noise to my private awareness. You can pick your friends, but not your family, I thought. It was one of those American sayings that always carried more bite than comfort. Tonight it landed heavy. My friends would have placed me at their side, but blood kept me in the shadows. I knew something sharper was waiting. The night hadn't yet peaked, and humiliation has a way of layering itself until you almost admire the craft. Miss Theodore? A baritone voice interrupted. I turned to see a man, tall, tailored, gold watch flashing under the chandelier. He was one of my father's business associates, a fixture at every deal-signing cocktail hour. He slid into the empty seat next to me without invitation. So you're the quiet one, he said, lips curling in a polite smile that didn't reach his eyes. Tell me, did you ever work in the company? Or do you just show up for the parties? The laughter that followed wasn't just his. Two guests at my table chuckled, one covering her mouth as if embarrassed, though her eyes glittered. My eldest sister, Noctra, standing nearby, didn't correct him. She smirked, turning her head like she hadn't heard, but I knew she had. I inhaled, let the sting burn before releasing it. My answer came calm, steady. I've always preferred building things over talking about them. The man blinked, taken aback for a second, but then his grin returned. Interesting. You remind me of your father in his early days, though he always knew how to take the stage. He lifted his glass, dismissing me before the conversation even closed. Inside, I noted the irony. He had meant it as a jab, but I let it slide across the surface of me, refusing to let it sink deep. My restraint, I knew, was power. What struck me harder was what his words confirmed. The story my family had been telling wasn't just within these walls anymore. It had seeped into the circles beyond, written into the scripts of men like him. My father's lesson to my sisters rang in my ears. Perception is reality. I'd heard him say it often enough, always to them, never to me. And here was proof. The perception had been crafted, the reality cemented. I was the quiet one, the one who didn't matter. This wedding wasn't only a celebration, it was a theater, and I had been cast as the outsider. I sat taller in my chair, swallowing the anger threatening to break through. It simmered hot, pressing against my ribs, but I held it. Their stage was not where I would speak my truth. I would wait. I would choose my moment. The MC's voice boomed over the microphone, pulling the guests' attention. Ladies and gentlemen, may I direct your eyes to the screens. Tonight, we reveal a special gift to the bride and groom, presented by the proud parents. I froze, my skin prickling before the reveal even came. The screens lit up with images of a sprawling property by the water, a lake house estate, acres of woodland, a place anyone would envy. The room erupted with applause and gasps of delight. But I knew it. I knew every corner of that house. It had been mine, at least on paper, purchased with profits from an early project I had built. Years ago, I had placed the deed in trust, convinced it was a safe way to support future endeavors without drawing my family's scrutiny. Later, under the guise of consolidating family holdings, my signature had been maneuvered out, the property quietly absorbed. I hadn't fought then. I had chosen silence, biding time. Now projected as a gift from Thorin and Elsinore, it gleamed like a jewel in their crown. The crowd clapped louder, rising to their feet. "Such generosity," someone near me whispered. "They're remarkable parents." My breath stayed measured, but inside I thought, they didn't just erase me. They dressed me in their clothes and called it their own. I scanned the faces, Celandine wide-eyed, tears pooling, clasping Lucan's hands as if she had been given the keys to her own fairy tale. My father stood tall, soaking in praise. My mother bowed her head slightly, modest in false humility. The applause echoed like thunder, each clap another nail in the coffin. They were so intent on sealing over me. But I stayed still, fingers tight around the stem of my glass. The bitterness sharpened into something else, not despair, but resolve. The best revenge is not anger, it's timing, my mentor once said. And tonight, timing was everything. I didn't move, didn't speak. To protest now would have been to play the fool in their theater. So I sat, quiet, waiting, sharpening my silence like a blade. The MC cleared his throat. "And now, a word from the father of the bride, Mr. Thorin Theodore." The spotlight cut to him, glass raised high, his smile too large, too rehearsed. I steadied myself, pulse calm. This wasn't an accident. This was war disguised as a wedding, and I would not be the casualty. The MC's call for silence carried through the ballroom, slicing through the chatter. Guests began to drift toward their tables, drawn by curiosity and the promise of speeches. Waiters moved quickly to clear away plates, replacing them with fresh glasses of champagne. The lighting shifted, dimming until a single spotlight cast itself over the podium. My father stood there, glass in hand, the picture of a man who believed the world itself bent toward him. His shoulders were squared, his chin high, his smile wide and polished for the cameras, and the eyes that never dared look away. I watched the way people leaned in, as if his presence alone gave the night its meaning. Inside, I thought, for him, even love must be performed on a stage. This wasn't going to be a toast to the bride and groom. This was going to be about him, about the empire he never let us forget, not even in moments meant for others. He cleared his throat. The room hushed at once, like trained students before a lecturer. "My friends," he began, his voice resonant, "family, honored guests, what a glorious night. Tonight we gather not only to celebrate love, but to honor legacy." I knew it. Every speech, every chance he had, circled back to legacy. His favorite word. "Marriage," he continued, "isn't just about two people. It's about building. It's about creating a future, and no family knows that better than ours. Strength, resilience, vision. This is what the Theodore name has always stood for." Applause punctuated his words. He let it wash over him before continuing, his tone shifting, pride deepening. Tonight, I am proud to share news that marks not just a wedding, but a new era. After months of negotiations, after careful planning, he paused, letting suspense coil. Thorin Industries has been sold to Everest Holdings. The room erupted. Gasps, then cheers, then a standing ovation from some. The number 50 million rippled from table to table, murmured with awe. Strangers congratulated each other as if they too had earned it. My father lifted his chin, drinking it all in, his smile widening under the applause. At my table, I sat still, every clap sounding like nails on glass. My sister's wedding had just been hijacked and turned into a press release. The moment that should have belonged to her was stolen, another jewel for him to add to his crown. Inside, I thought bitterly, even here, he finds a way to make everything about his empire. My gaze swept toward my mother, who dabbed the corner of her eye, playing the part of the proud wife. Noctra beamed, standing tall beside him like his chosen heir. Celandine, though smiling, looked almost confused, as if realizing the spotlight wasn't hers after all. He finished his proclamation with flourish, raising his glass high. To the Theodore name, and the future it will always command. The crowd cheered, glasses clinked, and then, before anyone could settle back into their seats, Lucan, the groom, rose. He slipped the microphone smoothly from my father's hand, as though he had rehearsed it. I'd like to say a few words, he announced. His smile was practiced, his tone honeyed. It has been the honor of my life to join this family, not just as Celandine's husband, but as a partner in all things. Guests leaned forward, eager. He continued, over the past year, I've had the privilege of working alongside Thorin himself, learning, contributing where I could. This sale to Everest Holdings, it's not just about securing a company's future, but about securing the legacy of this family. And I'm proud to say, I'll be part of that legacy. Cheers erupted again. Noctra smirked across the table, pleased with the show. Elsinore clasped her hands like a woman receiving benediction. Even Celandine glowed brighter, beaming as though her groom's words tied a ribbon around the evening. I sat frozen. His words were vague, but deliberate. He hadn't actually done anything in that sale. I knew because I knew who had. But the crowd didn't care. They ate up his performance, applauding like he had signed the deal himself. I clenched my jaw, steady. Inside, fury coiled but stayed contained. He's piggybacking on my silence. He's draping himself in work that was never his. It resonated in a way I knew too many in this country would understand. The opportunist who takes credit. The loudest voice in the room drowning out the one who actually built the foundation. As the applause died down, I breathed slowly, letting the anger harden into resolve. Not only had my father stolen his daughter's wedding for his empire, but the groom had stolen my unspoken achievements, wrapping them in his speech like they were wedding vows. I thought, they think they're writing me out. But I've already written my name where they'll never erase it. The heat in my chest cooled into something sharper. Determination. Maya Angelou's words floated into my mind. Still, like air, I'll rise. And I knew, no matter how loud they grew tonight, silence was my strength. Because when I spoke, it wouldn't be forgotten. Lucan handed the microphone back to my father, who stood tall once more. He raised his glass, commanding the room again. And while this sale brings us security, he said solemnly, it also brings difficult choices. Tonight, we settle the question of inheritance. My fingers tightened around the stem of my glass. I knew then the humiliation wasn't over. It was only sharpening its blade. The applause from Lucan's smug little speech had not yet died down when my father lifted his glass again, commanding silence. His presence at the podium was absolute. People hushed mid-sentence, forks paused mid-air. He didn't even have to ask. Deference rolled through the room like a rehearsed cue. I knew that smile on his face. It was the kind he wore right before delivering a blow disguised as wisdom. When my father smiled like that, it was never good news for me. The lights shimmered across the crystal glasses on every table, catching reflections like stars trapped indoors. Guests leaned in expectantly, thinking they were about to hear blessings for the bride and groom. I braced myself. His words had already wandered into the territory of boardrooms and balance sheets rather than vows and love. And I knew his speech wasn't finished. It was only loading its sharpest edge. He let the room settle into stillness before speaking, his voice low but forceful, the kind that pushed past every corner of the ballroom. "Tonight," he said, "is about legacy. Legacy is not only love, but stewardship. A family does not thrive without clear vision, without decisive leadership." He gestured toward my mother and sisters. "And tonight, as we celebrate this union, we also look to the future of the Theodore name." My breath slowed, body stiff. Here it came. "My eldest, Noctra," he announced, "has shown tireless dedication to our public standing and social commitments. Her judgment has proven invaluable. She will receive her due recognition, and she will be rewarded accordingly." Applause followed, polite and affirming, as Noctra tilted her head modestly, but with a glint of triumph in her eyes. "And my beautiful bride, Celandine," he continued, "enters her marriage tonight with a foundation secured. A trust has been established so that she and Lucan will never want for stability." More applause, louder this time, the crowd smiling fondly toward my sister, who dabbed at tears of joy. Then he turned toward me. I felt his gaze slice across the tables, sharp and cold, pinning me in place. His tone dropped to a theatrical sigh. "And as for my youngest—" He let the pause stretch, every head turning toward me. "She gets nothing." The words dropped like a blade. No explanation, no softness, just finality. It wasn't just an omission. It wasn't a quiet decision shared behind closed doors. It was a public execution of my place in the family. Gasps rippled, followed by murmurs, the rustle of disbelief. Guests glanced between me and my father, hungry for my reaction. Some leaned forward, waiting for tears, waiting for me to run, to crumble into the shadow they had long decided I belonged in. I didn't move. My chest burned, but my face remained still. Inside, though, the words seared. This was never about money. It was about belonging. And tonight, he had severed me from the story altogether. The pause didn't linger empty for long. A laugh slipped from one guest, nervous at first, then echoed by others, sycophantic chuckles rising like smoke. They weren't laughing because it was funny. They were laughing to stay aligned with power. At the head table, Noctra smirked triumphantly, her eyes darting to mine with relish. My mother avoided me completely, her gaze fixed on the centerpiece of roses, as if studying them could absolve her. Celandine looked stricken, torn between pity and silence, but she said nothing. Then, as if on cue, an outsider's voice cut across the quiet. "Guess she's just the decoration child." The words were loud enough for my table to hear, and soft laughter followed. Humiliation doubled back on itself, not just from my father, but from those watching, eager to reinforce the spectacle. I sat motionless. My internal voice steadied me. "They want you to break. But silence can cut sharper than screams." I took a sip of water, hand steady. I thought of an old lesson from a mentor who had once pulled me aside after a failed pitch years ago. Never play your move while they expect it. Wait until the applause dies. So I breathed, steady and deliberate, letting my chest rise and fall slowly. The humiliation was unbearable, yes, but it was also clarifying. This was the point of no return. The night had shifted from subtle erasure to outright annihilation, and they believed I would crumble beneath it. But what they didn't know was that pain doesn't just break, it refines. "What hurts you blesses you," Rumi once wrote. "Darkness is your candle." As I sat there, the words echoed in me. My father's cruelty had burned, but it lit something I could never put out again. My silence wasn't surrender. It was sharpening into something far more dangerous than fury. The clinking of glasses broke my thoughts. My father smiled, soaking in the attention, believing the room was still his. Guests raised their drinks in forced celebration, parroting his authority. The applause was for him, but the silence inside me was louder. They think they ended me with those words, I thought, my gaze fixed on the man who had just disowned me in front of everyone. But in truth, that was the beginning. The ballroom still buzzed in the wake of my father's declaration that I was to receive nothing. Whispers traveled table to table, weaving themselves into the fabric of the evening. I caught fragments. "Can you believe he said that?" "She must be devastated." Some faces turned toward me with pity, others with poorly concealed amusement, as though my pain were entertainment. I sat still, unmoving, refusing to give them the show they were waiting for. Inside, my voice was firm. "Let them think I am broken. They don't see that silence is my sharpest blade." I closed my eyes for a moment, focused on the rhythm of my breathing. The humiliation pressed hard, but I had carried this weight for years. I knew how to stand beneath it. My glass of water reflected the overhead chandeliers, tiny fractured lights staring back at me. I gripped it, letting its coolness anchor me. At the podium, my father basked in the adoration. Guests leaned toward him, their faces glowing as though he were handing out blessings rather than delivering executions. He lifted his chin, smiling with the ease of a man who believed the world was still entirely his. I rose slowly from my chair. The scrape of the chair legs against the floor carried farther than it should have, drawing heads toward me. Murmurs spread like ripples on water. I felt every eye, each one expecting tears, an outburst, a collapse. But instead, I stood tall, lifted my glass, and steadied my voice. In my family, standing up wasn't rebellion. It was declaration. The room hushed, a stillness heavier than the chandeliers above. My father glanced at me, slightly annoyed by the interruption, but confident. He thought he had already crushed me, that whatever I said now would be the whimper of the defeated. "Father," I began, polite but firm. My voice carried, cutting through the air with calm precision. "May I ask, who purchased the company?" Silence. A pause long enough to draw every guest's attention back to him. He blinked, caught off guard by the question, then straightened, puffing his chest with pride. "Everest Holdings," he declared, his tone swelling with triumph. "One of the great titans of industry. 50 million." The room erupted again. Cheers, nods of approval, whispers of admiration. Guests clapped, congratulating him anew, some even shouting words of praise. He basked in it, glowing as if he had just announced the conquest of a kingdom. But I only smiled. Inside, I whispered to myself. And with that one word, he walked right into the snare I set 15 years ago. I let my face remain composed, my eyes locked on him. My glass rose slightly higher. Whispers began to stir. A faint smile curved at my lips, not wide, not loud, but sharp enough to be seen. It spread quietly through the room. People leaned closer, asking each other, "Did you see that? Why is she smiling?" Their curiosity grew, unease rippling through the audience. I didn't explain. I didn't need to. A smile can be louder than a scream when you know the ending to the story. The champagne in my glass bubbled softly, the only sound near me. I let the moment stretch, suspense tightening its grip on the room. My father shifted at the podium, suddenly less comfortable under my gaze. His smile faltered for the first time that evening, though he quickly masked it, convincing himself that my restraint was surrender. Guests exchanged glances, tension mounting. They didn't know why I smiled, but they knew it meant something. The power in the room had tilted, even if they couldn't yet name how. Inside, I steadied my resolve. They thought tonight was their finale. They never imagined I wrote the last chapter. The MC's voice broke the silence, inviting the crowd to raise glasses for a toast. All around the room, crystal lifted high, sparkling under chandeliers. My father raised his as well, confident once more, believing the night was still his. But mine stayed lifted too, my smile unwavering, unblinking, carved in place. And I knew, when I finally spoke again, the world inside that ballroom would never look at me the same way. The ballroom still vibrated with the echoes of my father's inheritance decree. Conversations overlapped, a mix of whispers and speculation, the clatter of utensils barely masking the tension that hovered above every table. Some people glanced at me with pity, others with the smug look of spectators satisfied that the black sheep had finally been put in her place. I stood, and the movement alone silenced the nearest tables. Eyes followed me, waiting for me to flee or collapse. They wanted tears. They wanted the spectacle of a daughter broken beneath her father's hand. But I didn't move toward the exit. I lifted my glass, steady as stone, and let my voice carry into the silence. I wasn't about to scream. I wanted silence to do the heavy lifting. My father blinked at me from the podium, still riding the high of his announcement. He didn't know that his moment of triumph was seconds away from becoming his humiliation. "Everest Holdings?" I asked evenly, my tone laced with curiosity, not anger. "That's impressive. Tell me, father, who signed the papers?" A ripple moved across the crowd. The question sounded harmless enough, but there was weight in the pause that followed. He smirked, puffing his chest, mistaking my calmness for surrender. "Eliza Stone," he boomed, relishing the name. "CEO of Everest Holdings, a formidable woman. She signed personally." He nodded, proud, certain he had dazzled the room with the scale of his deal. Guests clapped again, some rising for a second ovation. I let them cheer for a heartbeat before I set down my glass and spoke, each word sharp enough to cut through applause. "I am Eliza Stone," I said. My voice was steady, clear, impossible to mistake. "I own Everest Holdings, which means, father," I let my eyes lock onto his, "I already own the company you bragged about selling." The room froze. Gasps broke like shattered glass. The clapping halted mid-motion. People looked from me to him and back again, trying to process what they had just heard. Whispers hissed like wind in dry leaves. I stood firm. The moment he thought was his triumph became his humiliation. My father's face drained of color. His hand gripped the edge of the podium as though the marble itself might steady him. Noctra's mouth fell open, her smirk erased. My mother raised her hand to cover her mouth, her poise cracking. Celandine clutched Lucan's arm, eyes wide, confusion etched across her face. They expected my tears, I thought, surveying the room. Instead, I gave them the truth. Phones rose across the ballroom. Guests began recording, sensing the magnitude of what had just shifted. The empire they thought they were witnessing expanded now belonged not to him, but to me. I didn't need to say more yet. I let the silence hang, the weight of my revelation bending the air. Then I raised my hand slightly, signaling to the back of the room. Quillon stepped forward, his presence calm and deliberate, a leather folio tucked under his arm. The sight of him alone made a few of the more seasoned guests lean forward, whispering, "Lawyer." He took the stage beside me, opening the folio with practiced ease. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his tone professional but edged with gravity. As counsel to Ms. Zoe Theodore, I can confirm that Everest Holdings is wholly owned by her. All contracts, filings, and articles of incorporation are signed, sealed, and finalized under her authority. My client is, in every legal and practical sense, Eliza Stone. He lifted copies of the contracts, the company's seal visible under the lights. The projector screens shifted, displaying scanned signatures, stamped approvals, filings that bore my name hidden under the alias they had dismissed for years. The whispers turned to audible shock. Someone muttered, "It's airtight." Another said, "He sold to his own daughter without knowing." The symbolism was not lost on me. Paperwork. The same dry, legal instruments my father had always dismissed as details was my sword, my shield, my voice. In a culture that worshipped proof, I now held all of it. The applause that followed wasn't for him this time. It was scattered, tentative, directed toward me. Some clapped in awe, others in fear of aligning themselves with the wrong side of history. I turned back to the crowd, my tone calm, almost casual. For years, you erased me. Tonight, I chose to exist. And in existing, I took everything you tried to keep from me. The ballroom was transformed. Where moments earlier the weight of humiliation had pinned me down, now it pressed onto him. People looked at me not as the forgotten daughter, but as the heir of power he had tried so hard to deny. My father reached for his glass, his hand shaking so badly the liquid inside trembled. He opened his mouth, but no words came. I lifted mine higher, smiling faintly, letting the silence stretch just long enough. "And that," I said softly, "was only the first truth I planned to reveal." The room was still gasping from my revelation. My father's empire, his crown jewel, was already mine. Phones hovered in the air, flashes glinting against the chandeliers, guests murmuring as if they had just witnessed a public execution. Thorin gripped the podium, but the confidence had bled from his face, leaving him pale and trembling. He tried to form words, but none came. I didn't let the silence linger. I pressed forward, my voice clear, cutting. Owning the company wasn't my only truth. It was just the beginning. Guests quieted again, sensing more to come. They leaned closer, eyes wide, anticipation bristling in the air. My father looked at me with dawning horror. He knew I wasn't finished. I lifted my hand slightly toward Quillan. He moved with the calm precision of a man who had been waiting for this cue. The projector screens flickered, shifting from smiling wedding photographs to stark black and white financial documents. Lines of numbers, signatures, bank logos. A hush fell across the room. "These," I said, my voice firm, "are the transactions that bled millions out of the company. Shell corporations, forged consulting agreements, offshore accounts, all meticulously designed to look legitimate. But if you look closer..." Quillan clicked, zooming into a scanned document. The crowd leaned in. At the bottom of a consulting contract sat a signature, forged sloppily under my father's name. Next to it, bold and undeniable, was another name, Lucan. Gasps rippled across the hall. Every false invoice, every wire transfer, every siphoned dollar. I let my gaze rest on the groom. Every path led here, to the man you now call family. Murmurs broke into words. Fraud. Embezzlement. Some guests recoiled as if betrayal were contagious. Others began whispering about lawyers, about the authorities. Lucan's face flushed deep red. He stood abruptly, stammering. This is ridiculous. These are lies, doctored papers." I cut him off. "Doctored?" My voice sharpened. "Then explain your emails authorizing payments to companies that don't exist. Explain the matching deposits into offshore accounts in your name. Explain why every trail of theft ends with you. The screen shifted again, this time displaying a string of emails. His name sat in the from line, his words, smug and careless, instructing fake transfers. The audience erupted. One guest hissed, "Unbelievable!" Another muttered, "He thought he could marry in and steal the rest." Inside, I thought, he believed he was marrying into an empire. He didn't realize he was walking into my courtroom. Lucan's voice cracked. It's not what it looks like." He turned to Celandine, reaching for her hand. "Darling, you know me. You know I wouldn't—" But the room was already shifting. Admiration evaporated, replaced by disgust. The same people who had cheered him minutes earlier now looked at him like he was rotten fruit. Some pulled out their phones to record. Others whispered urgently about calling the authorities. My father's face twisted, rage overtaking shock. He had brought this man into our family, trusted him as a son. Now, in front of everyone, the golden groom was revealed as a parasite. Noctra glared daggers at me, her silence louder than any insult. My mother clutched her pearls, her composure cracking as scandal seeped into her skin. And Celandine, my sweet, naive sister, stood frozen. Her bouquet slipped from her hand, crashing onto the marble floor. Mascara streaked down her cheeks as her eyes locked on the screen, then on Lucan, then back again. "You lied to me," she whispered. The words trembled, barely audible, yet they cut sharper than any shout. Lucan reached again, desperate. "Celandine, listen." But she stepped back, shaking her head, tears spilling. All of it. Every word. "It was all for this?" Guests gasped, some openly pitying her, others horrified by the collapse of the perfect fairy tale. Her white dress, so pristine moments ago, seemed to sag under the weight of betrayal. The image of the happy bride crumbled along with the empire my father had tried to showcase. Her fairy tale shattered on the same marble floor where mine had been denied for years. The symbolism was almost cruel. Her breakdown mirrored the collapse of the family's carefully painted image. It wasn't just business undone, it was marriage, trust, and identity stripped bare under the light of truth. Around me, chaos churned, shouts, whispers, glasses clinking nervously. But I felt no triumph, only inevitability. The truth doesn't care about timing, it only cares about light. And tonight, everything came into view. From outside, faint but unmistakable, the wail of sirens drifted into the hall. Guests turned their heads toward the windows, whispers rising. "The police." Someone must have called already. I steadied my glass, lifting it calmly as the storm raged around me. My voice, low but certain, carried to the nearest ears, and yet there was still one more truth left to reveal. The aftermath of Lucan's disgrace still hung in the air like smoke. Guests shifted uneasily in their seats, some whispering nervously, others staring at their plates as though they might find safety in looking away. The violinists had gone silent, their bows resting stiffly on strings, unsure whether to play on. The weight of what had unfolded pressed down on every corner of the ballroom, suffocating the laughter that had once filled it. Silence has a sound, I thought. Tonight it was the sound of my father's empire crumbling. Thorin gripped the edge of the podium, trying to steady himself. He forced his voice back into the room, but it cracked where it once boomed. This family," he stammered. We remain strong, stronger than rumors." His words wavered, unable to find ground. For the first time in my life, I saw him not as a titan, but as a man afraid of his own shadow. The tension had shifted. Power no longer radiated from him. It flowed elsewhere, filling the gaps he left in his faltering, and everyone in the room felt it. He raised his glass, desperate to reclaim authority. His hand trembled so violently that the champagne sloshed over the rim. A second later, the stem slipped from his grip, shattering on the marble floor with a sound louder than any applause. Gasps tore through the room. Guests covered their mouths, some muttering, "Oh my God." My father stared at the shards at his feet as though they were foreign to him. The broken glass glittered under the lights, a mirror of the authority that had just shattered alongside it. For the first time in my life, I thought, I saw him as mortal, not a king. He opened his mouth, but only stammers came out, words dissolving into nothing. His face paled, sweat beading at his temples. In a matter of seconds, the man who had built an image of indestructible dominance dissolved into something fragile and pitiful. Around me, chairs scraped back. Not because anyone rushed to help, but because phones rose. Guests lifted them high, cameras capturing every second. Some whispered as they tapped, "Live stream it." Within moments, red recording dots blinked across the room. Instagram stories uploaded in real time. TikTok captions forming before my father even stumbled off the stage. Laughter and pity intermingled. "The mighty Thorin, undone at his own daughter's wedding," someone muttered. A younger guest whispered gleefully, "This will be viral by morning." I watched, my expression calm. The same audience that once applauded him now documented his fall. That was the cruelty of our age. The internet forgets nothing. Thorin tried to shout, his voice straining, "Turn those off! This is private. This is family." But the more he demanded, the more desperate he looked. The cameras didn't stop. Each plea, each angry command only fueled the spectacle. His image, once crafted so carefully, was crumbling in front of strangers and friends alike. From the back of the room, I noticed another figure moving with quiet determination. A local journalist, invited to cover the wedding for its glamour, now had a front-row seat to scandal. Notebook in hand, camera flashing discreetly, he documented every stumble, every tremor. I could almost hear the headline forming, "Charleston tycoon, humiliated at daughter's wedding, dethroned by his own child." He slipped out the side door, no doubt to file the story. Once the press touched it, there would be no salvaging his reputation. My father could weather market crashes, lawsuits, even family fights. But public disgrace, once it spread, it never came back. Power is only power if others believe in it, I thought. Tonight, he lost the believers. I didn't gloat. I felt a strange bitterness mixed with sorrow. I hadn't wanted him destroyed. I had only wanted to be seen. But when you build your life on erasing others, eventually, you erase yourself. Outside the ballroom windows, red and blue lights flickered faintly against the night sky. Guests began to murmur, pointing, speculating. "Are they here for Lucan?" someone asked. Another whispered, "Or Thorin?" I lifted my glass, calm amid the ruin, and watched my father sink into his chair, his empire crumbling around him. And yet the final confrontation between us was still to come. The ballroom no longer felt like a wedding. It felt like the aftermath of a battle, a field littered with the wreckage of pride. Guests had thinned out, some slipping away into the Charleston night, not wanting to be associated with the scandal. Those who remained clustered at the edges, whispering in low tones, their eyes darting between me and my father. The floor bore the marks of collapse. Broken glass glinting under the lights, roses wilting in their vases, champagne flutes abandoned half full. It wasn't a wedding anymore. It was the funeral of my father's pride. I moved slowly across the marble floor, each step deliberate. My father sat slumped at the head table, the same place where he had once commanded the room like a king. Now he looked smaller, diminished, his shoulders bent beneath the weight of disgrace. His booming voice had cracked into mutters, half-formed words about betrayal, loyalty, and legacy, slipping incoherently from his lips. "You ruined me," he rasped when I drew near, his eyes bloodshot, his hand trembling on the table. I stood before him, steady. "No, father," I said quietly but firmly. "You ruined yourself when you erased me." He flinched at my words, and for a moment the strength he had always projected faltered completely. Around us, the guests stayed hushed, phones lowered. Even the ones still recording seemed to sense this was no longer for them. It was private now, something older and heavier than any viral clip. His eyes searched mine, and for the first time I recognized sadness there, not for me, for himself. But even that revelation brought me no comfort. Instead, it brought relief. After years of silence, I was finally speaking my truth, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. He tried again, his voice hoarse. "Everything I did for this family name, for the future. You think I was cruel? I was protecting us." I leaned closer, my tone sharper. "A name built on silence and control isn't a legacy, it's a prison. You told yourself you were building an empire, but what you really built was a cage. And you locked me out of it." His mouth opened, then closed. He wanted to roar, but no roar came. I pressed on, each word deliberate. "You dismissed me at 16, told me my work was a hobby, not a future. You left me out of photographs, out of speeches, out of this family's story. You taught my sisters to see me as less than them. And you smiled while you did it." The weight of the years condensed into a single breath. My voice did not tremble. "You taught me to fight, Father. You just never taught me how to stop when I won." The sentence hung between us like a verdict. His face contorted, anger flickering briefly, but it melted into resignation. He looked down at his hands as though seeing them for the first time, shaking, powerless. The man who once ruled his household, his company, and every conversation he entered had been reduced to silence by the truth. And that was the symbolism of it all. The fall of a tyrant, not by violence, but by words he could no longer deny. I straightened, turning away from him. My steps were firm, each one carrying me farther from the cage he had tried to hold me in. Inside, I felt the bittersweet rush of independence settling into my bones. I didn't need his apology. I didn't need his love. I only needed to know that I could stand without them. Oprah's words drifted into my mind. "The greatest discovery of all time is that a person can change their future by merely changing their attitude." And in that moment, I understood. My future had never belonged to him. It was mine all along. I walked past tables strewn with the debris of the evening. Guests parted quietly as I moved through, shoulders squared, gaze steady. The wreckage of the ballroom reflected the wreckage of a family, but it no longer defined me. Behind me, I left him sitting alone, his head in his hands, surrounded by silence. It was over, or so I thought. The ballroom had quieted to a graveyard hush. Guests who remained sat stiff in their chairs, their voices subdued, their eyes darting nervously between me, my father, and the shattered remains of the night. Phones buzzed incessantly, alerts of breaking headlines, push notifications carrying the collapse of the Theodore family beyond these gilded walls. Police lights pulsed faintly through the tall windows, blue and red washing over the chandeliers in rhythmic flashes. The empire that had erased me crumbled in less than an hour, and I was the one holding the match. Around me, the grandeur had dissolved into wreckage, broken glass scattered across marble, roses sagging under their own weight, champagne foaming on white tablecloths where it had been spilled in panic. The music had long since stopped, leaving only the hum of whispers and the faint wail of sirens outside. I moved forward deliberately, each step carrying the weight of finality. My father sat slumped at the head table, his figure bent, his hands trembling against the polished wood. He looked at me but didn't see me. His eyes glazed, his mind lost between disbelief and the dawning reality of ruin. I placed a sealed envelope before him, The sound of it hitting the table was soft, but it cracked through the silence like a gavel. "You wanted me erased," I told him, my voice steady, clear enough to cut through the still air. "Instead, I became the signature you could never escape." His lips parted as if to speak, but nothing came. His hand hovered over the envelope, afraid to touch it, as though it might burn him. Guests leaned forward, craning to see. Inside that envelope were filings, contracts, notarized documents that left no room for denial. Full control of the family's assets, transferred. Legal power, sealed in my name. It was not revenge, it was reclamation. I straightened, lifted my chin, and turned. My heels clicked against the marble, each step echoing like a drumbeat of liberation. It wasn't escape. It wasn't retreat. It was a march, the victory walk of someone who had finally claimed her place after a lifetime of erasure. As I neared the doors, the cold night air spilling in, a memory surfaced unbidden. I was 8 years old, bent over a puzzle at the kitchen table. My father had passed by, glanced at the completed picture, and for the briefest second he had paused. "That's smart, Zoey," he'd said absent-mindedly, before continuing out the door. That was the only time I had ever heard those words from him. For years I held on to it like a scrap of bread, starving for recognition, replaying it in my mind whenever I needed proof that maybe, just maybe, I had mattered to him. That single scrap of recognition kept me alive long enough to prove him wrong. But tonight, as I crossed the threshold of the ballroom, I realized I no longer needed it. His approval, his acknowledgement, his crumbs of praise, they were irrelevant. I was whole without them. Outside, the air was cool and sharp with autumn. The Charleston night wrapped around me, the faint sound of sirens closer now as officers entered behind me. I didn't turn to watch. Justice didn't always arrive in a courtroom. Sometimes it arrived in silence, in the stillness that followed the truth finally spoken. Thorin would face his reckoning. Investigations would unearth his negligence. Lucan would likely face charges, and the family name would wear the stain of scandal for years to come. But I didn't need to witness any of it. It no longer defined me. "The best revenge is living well," George Herbert once said. And as I walked farther from the ballroom, I understood it. The revenge wasn't in their downfall. It was in my freedom. I lifted my face to the cool night wind, breathing it in deeply. For the first time, the weight was gone. No stage, no cage, no expectations pressing down on me. I didn't win tonight because I destroyed them. I won because I finally chose myself. Behind me, the wedding lay in ruins, the family fractured, the empire burned, but I walked out free. "At my sister's wedding," I whispered to myself, "my father told me I would get nothing. He was wrong. I got everything that mattered. My freedom, my name, my story.